Welcome to a brand new podcast series on coaching tools and approaches, brought to you by the Association for Coaching, the world's leading international professional body, which is advancing coaching in business and society worldwide. I'm your host, Claudia, coach and entrepreneur and co-founder of The Growing Coaches. Research shows that certain approaches can be effective. However, it also shows that integrating more than one approach can be even more effective. I will be in conversation with experts and look in more detail at some of these approaches, what the research says, how coaches can apply it in their practice, as well as live coaching demos to understand better how the approach is put into practice. Our aim in this series is to bring you closer to the research and the information on a variety of approaches that you might like to put into practice. Welcome to Christian van Nieuwerburgh, executive coach with emphasis on intercultural coaching and coaching in education, also a best-selling author. Christian, you wrote the first book I read when I got introduced into the world of coaching, and it was super easy to understand. And I'm looking forward to hearing you explain positive psychology to us today. What got you interested in positive psychology in the first place?
Claudia, thank you so much. And thank you for the wonderful feedback. I love that book. And when I was writing that book, I was really thinking deeply about the readers. And so it's just lovely to get that feedback. And it's meant to be a companion. So thank you for that. I've been really looking forward to talking to you about this. It's something I'm passionate about, the integration of coaching and positive psychology. And the main reason is probably quite a personal and professional reason. So I've been coaching for a little while. I'm an executive coach, and I've been teaching people to become coaches, and I myself have been coaching. And then as I was coaching, I had a pretty, I think I was trying to be very clear about what coaching is. What is executive coaching? And for me, executive coaching is a really evidence-based, effective conversational intervention that's designed to help people bring about behavioral change, right? And also it's a very confidential conversation. So I think, if I use the word crisis, it's a bit too harsh as a word, but I had a kind of a personal, crisis is too harsh and doubt is too soft. But I got into this little moment where I started to question myself as an executive coach. And the reason I started to question myself is I was doing work with clients in organizations, and sometimes, not always, but sometimes, the client would be in a very difficult organizational setting, and my role was I had to keep it confidential. So I got this sense that sometimes my role as an executive coach was finding a way to allow this person to continue within a very difficult situation, either by becoming more resilient or try to focus on other things. But in other words, I was feeling a bit doubtful about, were there situations where I actually was part of the reason that the organizations weren't changing? Does that make sense? I was thinking, am I the reason by coaching individuals, helping them to kind of fit into the organizations they were? And also frustrating, of course, that I'm not able to give any of this feedback to the organization either. So I was thinking, but again, by my definition, that's not the role of coaching. Coaching isn't about making organizations better. Coaching is about supporting individuals. And that's when I started looking at what other types of interventions are more to do with the organization. So, of course, systems thinking, and there's a lot of work around that. But also positive psychology, for me, is a little bit more about how can we make environments better. And of course, it's also all about well-being. So it was that little crisis of, I'm not comfortable with my role here. I'm not making things better apart from I'm making one client experience maybe marginally better. So that's when I thought I want to look at other fields. And since then, I've been a huge champion of integrating coaching and positive psychology.
Thank you for that introduction into your experience. I'm sure other coaches have felt similarly, and into how to look at the individual versus the whole through positive psychology. Looking forward even more to hearing about what do you define as positive psychology?
Yeah, so positive psychology, the reason I think it, and interestingly, Claudia, there's coaching psychology and positive psychology have been around roughly the same time as academic areas of study. So that's kind of interesting. And coaching psychology has developed its own research and its own evidence base. But as I said, coaching psychology's focus is how do we bring about behavioral or changes to thinking. That's been the focus of how do we have conversations that lead to desired change. But at the same time, as we've been researching this with a very clear focus, which is very helpful, positive psychology has been taking a much broader view. So for me, positive psychology is, the science of well-being, you could call it, or another interesting definition is science of optimal functioning. And we could spend the whole time we have together today just talking about what we mean by optimal functioning. But so there's a whole science there that's looking into human beings at their best. It's a science that's interested in the idea of thriving or flourishing. How can human beings flourish or thrive? And coaching, some people could argue, is about that. But some people could argue it's not about that. Some people could say, Christian, it's not about thriving. It's not about well-being. It's not about flourishing. Coaching is simply a methodology to help a person set an objective and achieve that objective. And another problem I had, Claudia, is what if that's not a positive objective? What if the person I'm coaching, to me, it looks like what they're trying to do is something that it doesn't have a positive intention? What about that? Because again, the way I understand coaching and the way I've taught coaching is the coach is non-judgmental. So I'll be there. I shouldn't care, in a way, what the client wants to achieve. So the things that I thought there's overlap, Claudia, between coaching psychology and positive psychology. One is the idea of unlocking potential. So both fields are interested in human beings flourishing. And that's how I would define it. Unlocking potential means a person really being at their best, thriving or flourishing. They both have this idea, I think, of optimal functioning. The question really is, how can we support somebody to operate at their best in their context? So that's another area. And the third area where I think there should be overlap, but there isn't always, is I think there should be overlap on the subjective well-being of our clients. So those are both fields are interested in that. And that's why I thought it seems unhelpful to ignore all of the research and the studies and the theories of the field of positive psychology. So I've been arguing for the integration of the two fields.
On a different type of note, so there are these two fields. Yes. Positive psychology, of course, there's a lot of history of where it comes from. Can you tell us a bit of where positive psychology comes from and who are its closest cousins?
Yeah, cousins is interesting. Cousins, it's actually probably more like previous generations. I'm always thinking if it's a family tree, it's previous generations. And again, it's an excellent question you ask, Claudia, because I think if we were to go back a family tree, both coaching psychology and positive psychology have the same lineage, which is, I think, humanistic psychology was an important aspect of both coaching psychology and positive psychology. So that's a shared parent, if you like, or shared ancestor of both coaching psychology and positive psychology. The whole human potential movement, the whole person-centered movement, And so Carl Rogers, Abraham Maslow, and others, they were talking about human potential. They were talking about flourishing. They were talking about people, self-actualizing decades ago. So I would say we both have that shared ancestor. Now, coaching psychology has other ancestors, such as behavioral psychology and cognitive behavioral psychology. But this is more to do with this, I'm not going to say scientific, but more to do with the applied part of how do we support human beings to bring about change. And I think behavioral psychology and cognitive behavioral psychology are important early ancestors of coaching as well. And you know as well as I do, Claudia, I know you're a coach too. I think for me, part of being a coach or having a coaching way of being, we have to be good at acknowledging and appreciating. And I think sometimes we don't do that enough to appreciate. There's so many places where coaching psychology and positive psychology have taken so much from. The whole idea of a helping conversation. Coaching didn't invent that. That's been around for hundreds of years. So I'm a big fan of not separating things out, but actually saying, what's all the information that we have? What are the experiences that we have that will support us to have better conversations with our clients?
Makes sense. So you're explaining coaching psychology as a different approach to positive psychology, and you are integrating them both. Then you have cognitive behavioral coaching, which is, again, another type of approach that you can integrate with positive coaching psychology.
That's right. What I'm saying is that cognitive behavioral psychology really informs coaching. That's where coaching has come from, because it's all about helping people to change the way they think so they change their behaviors. So, a lot of what we call coaching psychology now, it takes a lot of research and practices from both behavioral psychology and cognitive behavioral psychology and humanistic psychology. But humanistic psychology also is one of the cousins or whatever of positive psychology.
And what is the difference between, if any, between coaching and coaching psychology?
You've asked a great question. I have my own answer to that. So coaching for me is the practice that we do. You're an executive coach, you're not, So coaching is the practice. For me, coaching psychology is the academic discipline that does the research and does the study. And why have we picked one discipline? Well, it's because this particular discipline is the one that's most aligned to what coaching is about, which is about human motivation. It's about understanding how people, operate, how people bring about change. So, coaching psychology for me is an academic discipline that supports the practice of coaching.
Perfect. So, if we think about acceptance and commitment therapy, for example, where would that fit into this description?
Yeah, so this is one of the other places where coaching psychology has looked at what works already, what are interventions that are working. And I guess, so for example, you have cognitive behavioral psychology, and then you have cognitive behavioral coaching, or you have cognitive behavioral therapy and cognitive behavioral coaching. And I think it's just a slightly different focus. And the way we distinguish, I guess, coaching from other helping conversations, and this is a little bit too simplistic, but the way we distinguish it is to say that coaching focuses mostly on the present and the future. But if there's been really effective ways of bringing about change in ways of thinking or behavior in previous years and decades, we bring those into coaching as well. So coaching is kind of eclectic, if you like. It takes effective ways of supporting people to bring about change, wherever they're from, and we incorporate it into modern coaching practice.
Perfect. So we have, of course, coaching is being influenced by motivational interviewing, by acceptance and commitment therapy, by positive psychology, by neuroscience, and etc. So when I see at positive psychology, what are those things that are characteristic of positive psychology where I would say that's a positive psychology approach?
Yeah. So for me, positive psychology is probably an umbrella term. So for me, it's wider than some of the examples we gave. So for example, solution-focused therapy, we take some strategies from there. But positive psychology for me is a much broader term that actually includes solution-focused approaches. So the definition, Dr. Robert Biswas-Diener and I have been doing a lot of thinking, and Robert is one of the first to coin the term positive psychology coaching. So I've been doing some work with him to kind of really update definitions and the way we think. And our definition is that positive psychology coaching is a conversational intervention that supports people to achieve meaningful goals and improve the quality of their lives by paying particular attention to existing strengths, available resources, and psychological well-being. So there's two parts to answer your question, Claudia. One is positive psychology really helps us to broaden our worldview. It can change the nature of coaching on the one hand. And on the other, there's specific theories and methodologies from positive psychology, which we can integrate into our practice. So I'll come to the second one later as we talk. I'll give some examples. But I think there's a possible shift in way of thinking that the whole field of positive psychology can bring to the field of coaching. And the shift is in that definition the shift is to say that the role of coaching, or if you like, the role of positive psychology coaching, is to support people to achieve their goals. That's always been the goal of coaching, right? But in a way that enhances their well-being. Now, here's a big question. And this is for all the coaches who are listening, I hope, a challenging question as well, which is, have we as coaches ever supported somebody to achieve their goals? But while we're helping them to achieve their goals, have we noticed that it's had an effect on their well-being? In other words, has there been cases where we've supported people to achieve their goal and they've achieved it, but at a cost to their well-being or the well-being of others? So what I mean about a change in thinking is moving away from thinking the purpose of coaching is simply to help somebody to achieve any goal that they set, in which case sometimes I think we may inadvertently be causing harm because we're adding pressure and we're pushing them to achieve what it is they want, to a new way of thinking about coaching, which is actually, it's about optimal human functioning. It's not simply about peak performance or not simply about achievement or not simply about performance. It's actually about holistic success, if you like. If we like that word success, we don't even need to use that word, but it's really about how can we help people to move towards what it is that they want in a way that's good for their well-being. So does that make sense? Of kind of positive psychology gives us that broadening of the purpose of coaching.
So basically, the benefit of introducing this to your entire coaching philosophy, so positive psychology to your entire coaching philosophy, regardless of what approach you're going to take specifically with the issue at hand or the goal at hand. And then we'll go now into deeper detail once you've moved on from that philosophy to once you are applying for a specific goal, you think that the best approach is positive psychology and you start applying it. What does that look like?
Yes, that's great. That's an excellent question. So what's unique about positive psychology coaching? And I hope the listeners will push back and say, well, they're not unique. But for me, what would define positive psychology coaching? One is an explicit interest in well-being. So a positive psychology coach is also interested in the well-being of their client and the well-being of those around their client. So, and it's explicit. Now, what does that mean in practice? In practice, when I'm contracting with my clients, in my contract, I go through what is coaching and I say, I'll be interested in supporting you, listening to you, helping you find a goal, helping you to work towards the goal. And I'm also have an interest in your well-being as you work towards that goal. So it's explicit interest. It's not a side issue. It's not something that might come into the conversation. It's built into the conversation as, in this conversation, I'm going to support you to move forward in a way that's good for your well-being and the well-being of others. So again, I'm going to jump back to philosophy. The philosophy of this, it's a very different philosophy. This philosophy is we're actually trying to make things better. So very controversially, yeah, the coach does have an agenda. The coach's agenda is to support the person to flourish in a way that's good. And I would argue that if you don't bring positive psychology in, that shouldn't be your agenda. Your only agenda should be, I'm supporting the client to achieve whatever it is they want, whether I think it's a good thing or not. But positive psychology means that now I'm interested in, is this going to be good for the client and those around them? So the other thing, positive psychology is informed by the science of positive psychology. And if the listeners were to Google positive psychology, or they may already have heard of it, or they'll see it's very broad. But as an example, there are decades of research into what leads to human well-being. So an example of informed by science would be, there is a science in motivation. There is a science in well-being theories. So positive psychology coaching would be delivered by people who access that science. So for example, the coach would be very familiar with Carol Riff's psychological well-being theory, or Professor Martin Seligman's PERMA theory, for example. So that's what's different, is it's informed by scientific understanding of things that are relevant for supporting people to move forward in an optimal way. The third one that may be different is that positive psychology coaching should focus on meaningful goals. So what does that mean in practice? Again, it's a pretty simple adaptation, but what I would do if I'm using a positive psychology coaching approach is when my client shares their goal with me, I would simply say, what's meaningful about that goal to you? What makes that goal particularly meaningful? And the reason for that is because if somebody's pursuing a meaningful goal, a goal that's meaningful to them, maybe that's intrinsically motivating, the pursuit of the goal in itself is going to be good for my well-being. Whereas if we're pursuing extrinsic goals or goals set by others or goals that are about meeting other people's expectations, there's a chance that pursuing the goal isn't good for our well-being. And it's only the achievement of the goal that gives us a temporary boost to well-being. So that's an example. So positive psychology coaching, we'd be making sure that the client is pursuing a goal that's personally meaningful to them. And then the other final thing I'd say is, in positive psychology coaching, we're biased towards the positive. So a positive psychology coach will always be listening out for what is working. If we're talking about very challenging situations, this is very much from the solution-focused approach, but if we're talking about challenging situations, we're listening out for exceptions, we're highlighting their strengths, we're getting them to talk more about their successes, we're focusing on celebrating their achievements, we take time to acknowledge them, we want to value them. So this idea of bias towards the positive, I would say that's another feature that would be unique to positive psychology coaching. And I can go into kind of some examples as well in a moment, but I just want to say one thing, if I may, Claudia, about going back to the science part of this. And just to use the example of well-being theories, if listeners are saying, okay, what do you mean? It's helpful to know well-being theories. So I just, again, Robert and I have written a bit about this. There's levels of sophistication about how do we use, and remember, positive psychology has literally hundreds of theories about human flourishing. I'm picking just one, well-being theory. There's different levels of sophistication. The first one, which I think is already helpful, and so this is, I think, useful for people who want to use positive psychology coaching, is being aware of the research and the relevant theories about well-being. So that's level one, just knowing about these theories and being familiar with them. The second is then being able to use that knowledge in a coaching conversation. So let's use Seligman's PERMA model, for example. If we know that engagement is an important component of flourishing or well-being, what I mean about using that theory is I might ask questions of how engaged are you at work? What are the things that most engage you? How can you do more of those things that engage you? Or in the PERMA model, of course, there's relationships as well. So I'd ask questions about who else can support you, those kinds of things. That's the second level. The third level is to be able to do that, but in a culturally sensitive way and in a way that acknowledges individual differences and context. So being very context focused. And then the fourth one, and I'm still learning all about this, and I'm still curious about this. The fourth level, I think this is the most sophisticated, would be reflecting on how our own attitudes and our own response to, in this case, well-being, thinking about how does my relationship with well-being and my attitude to well-being, how does that impact on the coaching conversation? And some people would say, well, Christian, that's not relevant. My attitude as a coach about well-being has nothing to do with the client. I also accept that argument, but I'm just curious. I'm wondering. And that would be very sophisticated level where we're using the science of positive psychology to change ourselves as coaches, and then maybe in some way the changes I make to myself are beneficial for my client and their optimal functioning. So I just wanted to go a little bit deeper into that, but that's all I'll say about why I'm passionate about positive psychology coaching. And some people would say all coaching is positive psychology coaching, and I love that. Some people might say we don't need positive psychology coaching, and I'm also okay with that. But what I think we do need to do as a field is make sure that we start to think about the well-being of our clients as central to what it is we do. And the recent pandemic particularly has really highlighted the importance of us thinking about performance and well-being side by side.
With that context of working towards well-being, having meaningful goals, and being biased to the positive as a way of being,
yes,
for the coach, can you take us through some of the theory of that, those concepts? So knowing the theory, applying how you have applied it, examples of how it has been applied with an awareness of the culture and with an awareness of own attitudes.
Look, we have to make sure we do this step by step. So I would say each of the things I'm going to talk about, these are things that I've built in gradually. And we're still in the process of theorizing about positive psychology coaching. It's not locked down. But I hope I've been able to convey the intention of positive psychology coaching. So there's lots of ways to do this. And I just want to reiterate the intention. The intention is that we're interested in supporting people to move forward in a way that's good for them and those around them, and maybe even in a way that's good for us as coaches. So my invitation to all the listeners is, one first step is make sure we're looking after ourselves. Our own well-being has a huge impact, I think, on our ability to provide what our clients need. So that's the big idea. But let's get specific. So one area of research that's very well supported within positive psychology is the strengths arena. So the VIA survey of character strengths, or the whole idea of character strengths, that was developed by Professor Martin Seligman and Professor Chris Peterson. That's where probably positive psychology started. And there's been so much research into the use of strengths. There's 24 character strengths according to the VIA survey. And since then, and even before then, there's been other tools for talking about human strengths. So that's an example of there's research there that's relevant to coaching, because according to the VIA survey of character strengths, if a person is aware of their strengths, really owns them, and uses them more, they're good at those things, and it's good for their well-being. So you see, this is actually a good example because there's research to show that. What does that mean in a conversation? Well, many different things, but just a few examples so that people can get practical with these. One would be to ask the client to do a strength survey, and then they might bring their strengths to the conversation. And the coaching question is, which of these strengths are going to be most helpful for you now? Which of the strengths do you already use in your work? Which others can you bring in? So that's one angle. The other is less kind of directly linked to surveys, but we can simply ask questions to the client about their strengths, or we can spot strengths. So we're talking to a client and we can say, I notice you have the strength of persistence, or I notice you have the strength of humor, or I notice you have high levels of social intelligence. That's what I'd say to you, Claudia. You have high levels of social intelligence and you're so easy to talk to. So I would give feedback to the client about strengths that I'm experiencing. So that's another example. And simply talking about one's strengths and self-identifying one's strengths can increase positive emotion. And positive emotion is one of the components of well-being. And actually, with a colleague, Alexandra Fouracres, we did some research into what is the experience of coachees or clients who self-identify strengths. And it's very promising. People find that helpful. So there's the whole research and theories about strengths that we can bring that in simply by spotting strengths, noticing, asking about strengths. The whole idea of asking about what existing resources are there, what things do you already have? Now, that's an appreciative approach, isn't it? And again, huge body of research into appreciative inquiry. That falls under the umbrella for me of positive psychology as well. So this idea of starting with what's working, that's appreciative inquiry. And again, very simply in a coaching conversation, when we're starting to talk about the current reality, questions that say, what have you already tried? What are things that are already working? Who can you already rely on? In other words, what's already there, and not focusing on the deficit. So that would be from appreciative inquiry. Anything we do during a coaching conversation to enhance positive emotions. Again, Barbara Fredrickson, huge amount of research. She's one of the most distinguished professors in the field, Barbara Fredrickson. Her research on broaden and build theory says that positive emotions actually lead to other beneficial outcomes. They're not an end in themselves. It's not, I'm supporting my client to experience positive emotions because that's nice. Actually, if people are experiencing positive emotions, they're going to be able to think more laterally. They're going to be more creative. They're going to be more open. So that's a research-informed strategy, which we can build into our coaching practice. So simply starting the conversation with a little bit of small talk, doing whatever we can to build a strong rapport, bringing humor and playfulness into the conversation, celebrating with them their successes and achievements. These are all intentional things we can do to boost positive emotions. Again, not just for the sake of doing that, because that's great. And by the way, it's great for the coach. As a coach, don't we want to have those empowering, energizing conversations? So positive emotions and this idea of the best possible self. I mean, there's so many I could mention. So I'll limit it to this because there's gratitude interventions, there's random acts of kindness. There's a lot of research that can inform our practice. But the last one that I would use is there's research in this idea of best possible self, the idea of imagining oneself in the best possible scenario, let's say 5 years from now. There's research that doing that and imagining it is going to be good for us and it's going to make us feel good. It's going to motivate us. So best possible self, how would we use that in coaching? During the goal stage, we could say, I can see what it is you want. Tell me 5 years from now, if everything's gone the way you like and everything falls into place and you're able to achieve what you hope you would achieve. Tell me about that in the future. And that description of it, talking about it, is helpful in the conversation. Another way to use it is to give it as a, maybe even before you meet the client, say, hey, before you come along, just write down or send me an email about you at your best 5 years from now. So that's another example of how we can do all of these things. I have a little proviso, which is one thing that positive psychology might help us with. Because remember, I said coaching psychology, it's a methodology designed to set and achieve goals. It's very goal-focused. But that idea of success is through the achievement of goals and always growing and developing, that's kind of a Western concept. It's not a universal concept that the only way that we're going to experience well-being is by achieving more and more goals. But it is implied in coaching that really this is about setting and achieving goals. But for me, in positive psychology coaching, maybe it's not about achieving goals. Maybe it's about achieving balance. So that would be a different approach to coaching. For me, it's still positive psychology coaching. Maybe it's not about doing more things. Maybe I go to my coach because I'm saying I've got too many things going on. I don't want to add another. Okay, now I'm going to organize better. Now I'm going to do some more exercise. Maybe one coaching session is simply about saying, I need better balance in my life. And again, Robert Biswas-Diener has done some great work on this. He's come up with a little model called the Genie model. I'm not sure it's even published, but the idea is that rather than setting goals, we kind of look at what's your ideal balance you want in your life in different aspects, and what do you need to do to rebalance things? And here we are, we're recording this at the beginning of the year, when usually one of the things we do is new resolutions, new ideas. But I wonder, given the 3 or 4 years we've been through as people, whether this kind of reevaluating, coaching for the sake of just taking a step back, looking at what's going on, no new goals, just balancing so that we're more aligned. And Claudia, we've talked about this a little bit separately, but I'm really interested in the idea of supporting people to be more aligned to their values and adding goals and just trying to, I can think of situations where clients, I would finish a whole series of coaching conversations and then they immediately say, hey, I'd like to set up another contract. Now I have another goal. And I'm thinking, let's celebrate. Let's take a bit of a break. You've just achieved an enormous goal. Let's sit back. But this constant, now I need another goal. Coaching colludes with that way of thinking, because coaching is always like, okay, what's the goal? What are we going to do? What are you going to do now? Let's do something. Whereas, personally, over the last couple of years, what's been helpful for me is simply rebalancing and reevaluating. And that's been useful.
Thank you for taking us through those examples about strengths and looking at the resources you have. Appreciative inquiry, positive emotion, and this last one of rather than setting goals or making the goal being more balanced and more of an observation or an analysis or awareness of what is happening and what the situation is like now. You also mentioned motivation and vast amount of research on motivation that could be used in coaching. Could you give us some examples of that and more about the research?
Yeah, well, one of the great books about this is actually, I think it's a finance book. It's not even a motivation book. The book called Thinking Fast and Slow. That's an excellent book. It's all about human motivation. Human motivation is in there. Daniel Pink's work about motivation. And if you were, for example, to go and find a TED Talk by Dan Pink, I think the TED Talk is called, based on his book, Drive, the Surprising Truth of What Motivates Us. There is a lot of research about what are the things that motivate us. And I guess, again, being familiar with those things and building them in. As an example, I'm just thinking right now about how we would use that is even, another set of theories is goal theory, but goal theory is again linked to how can we set goals that are more likely to be achieved? What are the goals that are going to be more motivational? So if you look at goal theory as a whole, one of the interesting aspects is that a set of different types of goals is motivational. So how would we use this in coaching? If the client tells us about a distal goal, to use the language, but it's basically a long-term goal. If they tell us about a long-term goal, it's actually, the research would tell us it's helpful for them also to have a proximal goal, which is a short-term goal. So what would we do in coaching? The person says, 10 years from now, I want to be doing this. Well, the research would suggest, let's put in a shorter-term goal as well. So what would you like to see 6 months from now? But the reverse is also true. Sometimes we get clients who are so focused on 3 months from now, I want this. So we'd consider that a proximal goal. And then if I hear that, what I'm saying is, what would you like to be happening 5 years from now? If you manage this, what does that lead to? So that's an example. Another example is this idea of approach goal versus avoid goal. And again, we need to know a little bit about the research. We need to know about the theory. But basically the theory is, if it's an approach goal, in other words, it's a goal that something I want to achieve. And the other is an avoid goal, which is something I want to not happen. The research suggests that approach goals are better for our well-being. We're more likely to be motivated, and we're more likely to stick with that goal. So in practical terms, you're a coach, you're sitting there listening, you say to your client, what's the goal? If they say, well, I don't want to be having arguments with my team anymore, that's an avoid goal. They're telling us what they don't want. So the simple process would be, of course, appreciating, listening, acknowledging, but then saying, well, what is it you want? So in other words, we're helping them to reframe or reimagine their goal towards an approach goal. And I'll give you a real example of this. I was coaching someone. It was our first meeting, and I went in, I met them, a little bit of small talk. We sat down, very comfortable arrangement. And I said, so tell me what's brought you to coaching? And they said, look, one thing I know is by the time I reach this age, they told me a certain age, by the time I reach this age, I don't want to be working here. So powerful, such a powerful, clear statement. I could carry on with that. That's very clear. They're very clear about they're clear about what they don't want. So immediately I thought, okay, I'm clear about what they don't want. Now, again, I listened to that. I got some more information. It sounds like you're very clear about that. It sounds, what are the things that are making you say that? Well, these are the things, and I know. And it's simply gradually, I simply said, oh, that's so good to know. Interesting. What is it you do want? And then they started to say, well, I'd like the role to be a little bit more like this. I want this part of it in there. And I wanted to use that example because obviously we can go with both, but the kind of thinking that would accompany, I don't want to be here, means that almost anything is fine, right? So I can imagine the conversation would have gone, oh, I just need to get out. I need to find anything. Whereas the conversation, when it was switched, first of all, became more motivational because we were talking about what they did want. Positive emotion increased already. Hopefulness increased. We didn't spend the whole conversation talking about the reasons they didn't want to be where they were. We started to talk about imagining that desired future. And there's an amazing theory. Again, I keep throwing in theories, but intentional change theory. Intentional change theory would say that we need a clear view of a desired outcome, and then we need to think about what we need to learn. Other theories that inform this kind of thing is self-determination theory, of course, very important because it tells us our clients need autonomy, they need to feel related, they need to feel competent. You can see that if we're aware of that theory, in my coaching, I'm thinking, are these things here? Does my client feel a sense of autonomy? Do they feel connected? Do they believe they're good at what they're doing? You can ask questions about that. Hope theory, another huge theory in positive psychology. Hope theory would also tell us you need to have a desired future state. So hope theory would also challenge the idea of working with, I don't want something, because, well, it's difficult to become hopeful about what you don't want. It's easier to become hopeful about what you do want. And then hope theory says, once you have that desired future kind of state, then you need to have pathways thinking and you need to have agency thinking. And the pathways thinking, that's built into coaching, which is we help our clients come up with different ways to move towards their goal. And agency thinking is all about building self-efficacy, or the belief of the client to want to bring about, to believe that they can bring about that change. So I think these are other examples of how theories, and it has practical implications, Claudia, because I'm sure as coaches, we've probably all experienced this, but sometimes you go to the client, they're pretty clear about what they want, they understand the situation now, and you get to the option stage where this pathways becomes important. And they only give you one option and they think, yeah, this is what I need to do. Yeah, and we haven't even gone into multiple options yet. And I guess, logically thinking, we might say, well, they already know what they want. Why do we waste time going through other options? Let's just work with this one. But the theory, hope theory, would say we need to believe that there's multiple pathways. Believing that there's more than one pathway increases hopefulness. And hopefulness gives us motivation. You see, so I'm glad we've just uncovered a few examples here, but I don't want to overcomplicate it. So I want to come back to this idea that it's just this idea of having a positive bias, being interested in all of the things that lead to well-being and increased motivation. And our knowledge of that as coaches, we don't even have to use it explicitly with our clients. Simply us knowing these things can help us to manage a conversation. And so it's very possible that if I'm doing a positive psychology coaching conversation, an observer might say, well, that's not very different from any kind of coaching conversation. But maybe part of it is the knowledge of the coach around theories about human beings at their best. But I want to come back to this idea of optimal human functioning, which is an idea that's really dear to me. Optimal human function. Human beings at their best. Human beings pursuing things that are meaningful to them, believing that what they're doing is of value, and being able to do that in a way that makes them feel good about themselves. And, imagine the change that we can have as a coaching community on the world if we move away from simply believing that our role is to help people to achieve whatever goal it is. We're then participating in, I think, this idea of, this sounds too grand, but making the world a better place to live in. And just not in coaching terms, but if the listeners think about all the professionals they know around them, the whole variety of professionals that they're aware of, and we think about the percentage of people who are loving their jobs, look forward to going to them, give it everything, feel valued in their workplace, what is the percentage of that? And actually, the engagement literature isn't very encouraging when we look at engagement. And this is even before the pandemic. People who were engaged at work were like 16% of people at work reported that they were engaged at work. And the rest were either not engaged, and that's the better one. They were not very engaged. But there was even a percentage of people who were actively disengaged. And their main thing at work was to try to disrupt, or they were so disengaged. And disengagement is a term that's used professionally, but if you're the person who's disengaged, you're not feeling valued at work, you're not getting any positive emotions, imagine the impact it has on their family lives, on their communities. So that's why I'm a big proponent of, we don't have to call it positive psychology coaching, but I love the idea that coaches are not just about achieving goals. We're about our job is optimal human functioning.
Thank you for those examples and research, and I guess giving us an idea of the gem that we have there on research about theories that help and support coaching. That's positive psychology provides us. And as you mentioned before, for those interested in being more impacted or having more of positive psychology in their coaching, it's about knowing the theory, applying it, making sure you take into account culture, and of course, seeing how your own attitude towards those research topics are. We got there a list of topics,
yes.
Very comprehensive. And there you were talking, for example, about goal setting and things that are basic for coaches, of course, that it almost made it sound like every coach should, at their foundation, have, of course, learning. And we probably do learn it, just not with the label of positive psychology, but how to go deeper in positive psychology. You also mentioned a lot of things that, of course, can happen in the session and other things that can happen outside the session. I did my dissertation in homework, so I'm very passionate about the use of homework. I call it homework, and I shouldn't after I've done the dissertation because, of course, there's a lot of negative connotation to the word homework that can also be there.
Yes.
So that's a bad habit, but basically the asynchronous work that the client will do after the session, and that, of course, can be designed with the session. Technology is a big topic as well. I was wondering how you felt technology enhances or hinders this type of approach.
Yeah. Is it okay if I talk about asynchronous activity first?
Yes.
Yeah. Oh, well, thank you for doing the research on that, first of all, Claudia. And yeah, exactly. There's a great example. I would say this is part of positive psychology coaching, is really being aware of the impact of the words that we use and trying to come up with words that may not have. So homework, or calling it tasks to do before. But I think that's so under-researched, Claudia. When we think about coaching, a lot of the research is what happens in the session, how does it happen, does it lead to people achieving their goals? What is the impact of it? But we miss out the time that most of the change, I think, actually happens. And that's in between sessions. So I love that reminder. And right now, I'm using the term experimentation. And again, with words, I know that has some connotations as well. But what I mean by that is this idea of supporting our clients to go after the session with a learner mindset, to just go and try things, so that when they come back afterwards, the question can be, how did that go? What did you learn? So I'm a big fan of agreeing what's going to happen between now and the next time we meet. And rather than setting it as a success or fail kind of a thing, this idea of it being, it's just an experiment. We're going to try this. We've talked about this. So next time I have a meeting with my colleagues, I'm going to try doing more of this or less of that kind of language. So when we come back, it's not, did you achieve it or not? It's, okay, so you tried it. How did it go? And if it went well, from a positive psychology point of view, we highlight that, we talk about it, we build on it. If it didn't go well, that's great, because we learned something. That was the whole point of the experiment. So yeah, I love that bit. And that's really helpful for us to remember. There's a lot of research into critical moments, or so-called aha moments. And Eric DeHaan, one of the leading researchers in our field, in the field of coaching psychology, and he's an executive coach himself, he's done a lot of this research. And, again, aha moments can happen during the conversation, but they don't have to happen there. We can just plant the seed, if you like, during a coaching conversation. We can just raise awareness. And that might be, the aha moment might come in between sessions. And that's why I think it's really important at the beginning of any follow-up coaching conversation. I like this idea of, what did you learn? What's different since the last time we met? So we can capitalize on what's happened in between sessions. So yeah, definitely under-researched area. Yeah, using technology. Well, What a great question. When the pandemic started, I really hated it. And I thought there's going to be so many downsides to this. I don't really like it. But in fact, even before the pandemic, there was a lot of telephone coaching going on already. There was already Skype coaching happening. So it's not suddenly, it's happening. But more people had to do that. And some people, it wasn't their comfort zone. And I was one of those people because I really like people. I really like interacting with people. For me, the coaching way of being is easier to exhibit in person. It's something we can pick up. So initially, I was very hesitant. I was a little bit reluctant. But we all switched to it. It's meant that we can coach globally now. We can connect with others. And I've discovered something. Again, this needs research because I'm not aware of any research into this. But I thought actually what's good about online coaching is that both the coach and the client are in their safe spaces, or they can be in their safe spaces. And I just noticed it one time when I was coaching. I was in a room, I had my books near me. Books are important. So I had my books around me. I look at my client, they're sitting in their room. They've got their cat with them. They're in their lovely room. And I thought that's something we don't get in face-to-face because we can't both be in our safe spaces. So I thought that's a huge advantage. And my client looked much more comfortable. So there's those kind of benefits. I guess we focus more on what we can see. We focus more on language. We focus more on what we hear. Another big advantage, I think, is to do with scalability of coaching or access to coaching. So I'm sorry to come across as very critical of coaching today, Claudia, but one big criticism of coaching is often the people who might need it the most can't access it. So there's huge access issues to the old way of doing it, which is you're only going to be able to do it if you can pay for it and you've got a nice place to meet and all the rest of it. But with online, the possibility now of really making coaching accessible very broadly. And there's, big global organizations now that offer huge amounts of coaching to people working all over the world. That's one. The other is a more recent question of how can we harness artificial intelligence, or actually I prefer intelligent assistance is probably a better phrase for it. But how can we use technology to support coaching conversations? And right now, Claudia, I work at a university in Ireland. It's a medicine and health sciences university. And we're actually doing some research into the provision of online coaching that's supported by artificial intelligence. In other words, we capture all of the data, some of it from those wristbands. The data comes to a human coach who works in our center. And the coach can monitor what's going on. And the artificial intelligence system makes recommendations to the clients all the time. So they're spotting things and there could be recommendations. But the clients can request a live interaction with the coach, either through text or... And we're thinking now about being able to roll it out in a whole district of Dublin. We would be able to provide coaching for thousands of people like this at a very cost-effective level because, we would only need 3 or 4 coaches, but they would be working with thousands of people. So I'm very excited about artificial intelligence. I'm not worried that it's going to take over our jobs because I don't think they can. Just to wrap up, again, positive psychology coaching for me is just really a very human way of interacting. And I do think that's the thing that... Well, when artificial intelligence can do that, I think it's all over for us. But the very human interaction. And that's why I think one of the innovative ways of using positive psychology for us is for us as coaches to be highly interested in our own well-being and really think there's this whole area of research about human beings at their best, whole area of research about well-being, of health, of lifestyle medicine. Are there lifestyle changes we can make so that we can be at our best for our clients? A great question would be, how do I need to be, not what do I need to know or what do I need to do, but how do I need to be so that my clients are more likely to benefit from interactions with me? In other words, is there a way that I could be that motivates clients? Is there a way that I could be that allows clients to be more vulnerable? Is there a way I could be that they're going to be more open? If we're interested in that, positive psychology, that's what it's all about. So that's why I think we should be looking at how does artificial intelligence or intelligent assistance, how can it support us to be able to provide coaching opportunities in a way that's more equitable globally.
Thank you for that comprehensive view of how technology is being used, of course, in the session, and how there's some self-coaching or AI impacted technology out there that can be used. We also mentioned, of course, during this episode, asynchronous work, and I was wondering if you have seen any technology being used for asynchronous work.
I haven't. I'll give you the short answer. I haven't. I've seen people being directed to do things online, but I think there's great opportunity there, but I'm not familiar with it.
Well, I think with that, anything else you want to leave the audience with? Any additional thoughts?
I do just want to say how much I appreciate coaches. It's a genuine thing. I really appreciate people who have dedicated a lot of time to learning about being a coach, who have dedicated professional time to supporting others. I think coaches are highly admirable. So I'm grateful to them. And the very fact they're listening to this podcast means they're thinking about their own professional learning and growth. Being, they're part of professional association. So I just want to give a heartfelt appreciation and gratitude for coaches and for everybody who's listening. So and especially for you, Claudia, thank you for creating such a wonderful space for me to, I know I've talked a lot, but I've had a chance to say a lot of the things that have been on my mind. And I really appreciate that, Claudia. Thank you so much.
Thank you again. We would probably ask for sources where people can read about this research. You did mention quite a lot of them during the episode. We'll try and gather them for the episode notes. And a final question would be where the audience can find you if they want to talk further about the conversation.
A lot of this thinking about positive psychology coaching has been with my good friend and colleague, Dr. Robert Biswas-Diener. And in fact, we have a regular column in Coaching Perspectives, which if you're a member of the AC, you should have access to. So please check out the column. We write about the integration of coaching and positive psychology in every issue. So please have a look at that.
Thank you. That's great.
There's 3 places where people can find me. One of them is a website. It's www.icce.uk.com. www.icce.uk.com. I've recently revamped that website, and the idea is to give away resources to people in education. I'm really passionate about supporting educators, schools, learners. So that's what it's about, but you'll find contact details there. If you just want to keep connected in a simple way, Twitter is the best way. I'm on Twitter at Christian VN. So it's CHRISTIAN VN. So at Christian VN. And I tend to talk about coaching on that Twitter account. And the third one, probably the most exciting one, Claudia, because from 2023, I'm starting a lifelong ambition I've had, which is to take my motorcycle and travel around the greatest motorcycling routes of the world. So I'm starting that in 2023 in Scotland. That I'll be talking about in my Instagram account, which is appropriately Coach on a Motorcycle. So if people are interested, it's at Coach on a Motorcycle. And from July of this year, I'll be starting with NC 500 in Scotland. And next June is going to be Route 66 in the US. So if anybody's interested in that, it's probably just me, Claudia, but I'm excited about it. Thank you.
Sounds like an amazing thing to look forward to. And I'm sure you'll have beautiful views for people to see, even though they're not there.
Yes.
Well, thank you for that. And thank you for your time today.
Thank you, Claudia. I really appreciate it. Thanks so much.
Thank you for listening to another episode by the Association for Coaching. I have been Claudia Day. We hope this episode offers you some new insight and inspiration. For 20 years, our purpose has been to inspire and champion coaching excellence, advance the coaching profession, and make a sustainable difference to individuals, organizations, and society. To find out more about the AC and our member benefits, follow us on LinkedIn or explore our webpage at associationforcoaching.com. There, you can keep up to date with our latest episodes, enjoy the wealth of digital learning offerings, and gain insights from our Coaching Perspectives magazine.